Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video. And today I'm going to be reviewing some more books from the Walter Scott Prize Longlist. So if you don't know, the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction is a yearly prize all about historical fiction, and I read along with the Longlist every year. I have already reviewed 4 other books from the Longlist this year, so I'll leave those videos linked down below. So I have 3 books from the Walter Scott Prize Longlist to review here today. One is Venetian Vespers by John Banville, one is Helm by Sarah Hall, and the third is The Pretender by Jo Harkin. So Helm and Venetian Vespers were on the long list but didn't make the shortlist. The Pretender did make the shortlist, and I'm very pleased because I loved it a lot. But I will not start by talking about The Pretender. I will start with my least favourite of the 3, which was Venetian Vespers. So Venetian Vespers is set on the turn of the century between the 19th and the 20th century, sort of literally in the days and weeks around the turn of the century. And we're following a man called Evelyn Dolman, who has been married for about 6 months, and he and his wife go to Venice for the winter as a sort of like belated honeymoon. And you kind of have the sense from the beginning that Evelyn is an unreliable narrator. It's clear that maybe his view on things isn't quite right. Him and his wife have a strained relationship, and he thinks that his wife is keeping some secrets from him. And after they arrive in Venice, he meets 2 new people who sort of come into their lives, and things go on from there. And the novel is set over quite a short space of time, and follows our main character in Venice and what happens while he's there. And I have to say, I really didn't get on with Venetian Vespers. I didn't like this book at all. I think this is probably my least favourite book that's ever been on a Walter Scott Prize longlist. And I feel like usually when there's a book on the Walter Scott Prize longlist that I don't get on with, my most common reason not to get on with a Walter Scott Prize longlisted book is that it's just a bit too literary for me. It's just that sort of high literary focus on writing style over plot and that kind of thing. Like, that's usually my problem. But that wasn't my problem with Venetian Vespers, though I do have a lot of problems with it. So there are a few different reasons, I think, why Venetian Vespers didn't work for me. One is that the main character, the narrator, is just horrible. You begin the book kind of thinking, oh, maybe he's just a bit sort of bumbling, maybe he's just a bit of a fool. And then there's something that happens about a third of the way through where you're like, oh no, he's just a despicable person and a massive misogynist. And I think he's meant to be. Like, I don't think you're meant to like him. You know, I can't imagine anyone picking up this book and not thinking that Evelyn is a horrible person. But you do have to spend the whole book in his head. And I just didn't want to be in his head. I think in many ways this is a book about sort of gender power dynamics and how men just did get away with doing terrible things at this point in time and many other times. As I said, Evelyn is very much a misogynist. And while I think part of the point of this book was to look at that and criticize that, I just found it so horrible being in his head and seeing some of the things that he says and does from his perspective. It's just so like unpleasant. So that definitely meant that I didn't enjoy reading the book, but I also wasn't very invested in the book because I just didn't care about him at all. And the only person he really cares about is himself, so you don't really get a very good look at the other characters who are there in order to be really invested in them. The one character who I was invested in is hardly in it. And then also, in terms of sort of really despising the main character, I also sort of was looking for a slightly different ending to this book, and I think the ending that is there isn't that satisfying after you've spent all this time in the perspective of this horrible person. So that is kind of one element. And then another element is that I found it quite unsatisfying as a mystery. There's various sort of mysterious things set up at various points in the book, and some of those things are resolved and explained, but some of them aren't. And one of the first sort of mysteries presented in the novel is never explained, which I found really unsatisfying. And then the mysteries that are explained, I feel like personally it wasn't that big a twist for me. I feel like I would have minded less reading a book in the perspective of someone whose head I didn't want to be in if there'd been a really like satisfying twist, but there wasn't really for me. And I also found this book quite oddly paced. I feel like the ending was very sort of sped through, and as I said, there were quite a lot of things left hanging that I wasn't expecting to be left hanging. And there's a sort of section in the middle that was very slow, and where not much happens and not much changes. So overall, I really didn't get on with Venetian Vespers. I do kind of see what it was trying to do, but I just hated being in the main character's head. I feel like I don't mind a dislikable narrator if they have something redeeming about them, or I don't mind a completely unredeemable character if they're not the perspective character. But I do think being in the head of someone who is just completely unredeemable is so wearying. And maybe if this novel had a different ending, I would have found some satisfaction there, but it just didn't work for me at all. I feel like that's the most negative I've been about any book on this channel for ages, but there we go. John Banville is a very successful established writer who doesn't need me to enjoy his books, and I did not enjoy this at all. But there we go. Let's move on to the other two books I've read lately from the Walter Scott Prize Longlist, which I enjoyed much more. So next let's talk about Helm by Sarah Hall, which I really enjoyed. This is quite a weird book. It's not going to be for everyone, but personally I really enjoyed it. It put me in mind of books like Cuddy by Benjamin Myers, or News of the Dead by James Robertson, or Olverton by Adam Thorpe. Books that span a really long period of time and that follow various characters at different points in time and use that to look at history, and often the history of a specific place. So Helm is the name of a wind, the name of a gust of wind in Cumbria that is very fierce, apparently. We follow Helm the Wind, but we also follow various people whom Helm the Wind touches in some way. We follow people in prehistoric times, we follow people in the medieval period, in the 18th century, in the 19th century, in the 20th century, in the 21st century, and we're following all of these characters who are in some way sort of bound together by the blowing of the great wind Helm. Some of these people worship Helm, some of these people are trying to banish Helm, some of these people are flying through Helm, some of these people are studying Helm. And all of these stories kind of weave together over time to create the story of Helm. And this book is about place and human connection and environment and climate change, and it's just really powerful, and it really worked for me. As I said, it's quite a weird book. All of the different strands weaving together and the fact that one of the main characters is a gust of wind is quite weird, but the narrative style is also quite odd, especially in the chapters that are sort of about Helm. Let me read you the very beginning to give you a sense of the style. Helm doesn't know when Helm was born, or brewed, conjured or conceived, first formed above the highest mountain, first blown into the valley, long before humankind, that brief, busy interlude. Time happens all at once for Helm, more or less, relative to longevity, a blink of the eye, universally. Warning, Helm loves cliches, typical for English weather. Something of a disorder, some would say. It's quite, tonally odd, but I actually really liked the unusual tone. I found it very funny in places. I thought there was some great humour. Probably especially early on. I think some of the humour sort of goes away as the novel progresses, but I did find it very funny. And I also found certain moments really moving, and I think some of the sort of portraits of human connection and the various people that sort of come into contact with Helm over time, I thought were really interesting. I really love books like this that pull together lots of different strands of history in order to tell the story of history over a really long period of time. That's what I loved about both Cuddy and News of the Dead, previous books that have been on the Walter Scott Prize Longlist. I just really enjoy books that use lots of different stories from different time periods to kind of look at history as a whole. I do feel like because Helm moves around quite a lot in time and doesn't always give you massive context for the different moments in time we see, you will probably get a lot more out of Helm as a novel if you know about British history. I can see that if you're not British or don't know much about British history, there are bits that would be quite confusing. But personally, I really enjoyed it. I didn't love it quite as much as I loved Cuddy by Benjamin Myers, and I think my sort of one gripe with the novel, I suppose, is that quite a lot of the different threads are left open-ended at the end. There's quite a lot of threads where we don't really know what happens to the characters. There isn't sort of a closing. Quite a lot of them are left in quite an ambiguous way, which is not my personal preference. I know a lot of people love an ambiguous ending. I have read too many Victorian novels and like everything to be wrapped up in a neat bow with 10 chapters of epilogue like Dickens does. Not every book, but a lot of books, and Helm was just a bit too open-ended for my taste, but I think that's very much a personal taste thing. I have no actual criticisms with Helm. I thought it was a very strong book, a really interesting one. I'm sad that it didn't make the shortlist because I would personally have put it on the shortlist above Sea Scraper or Ben Beckler. I thought it was a really interesting novel, and also one that sort of looks at history in a really interesting way, which is always what I love in the Walter Scott Prize, when a book is sort of picking apart history in the way that Helm is. in the way that we have all of these different stories, and obviously history is so concerned with humanity, but what about the things beyond humanity that are always there and have been there for a long time, and you know, how is humanity affecting that? All of those kind of things I thought were done really, really well in Helm. Overall, I really, really liked Helm, and I would very much recommend it. But my favourite of the three I'm reviewing today was definitely The Pretender by Joe Harkin. This book, I'm very pleased to say, has made the Walter Scott Prize shortlist. I would be very happy to see either The Pretender or The Matchbox Girl win. We'll see what does. I have now read 4 books out of the 5 on the shortlist, so I still have Once the Deed is Done to read, hopefully in the next few weeks. But I am very pleased that there is at least one other book on the shortlist alongside The Matchbox Girl that I love. I thought The Pretender was just fantastic. So this is a coming-of-age story and a sort of like royal political intrigue story set in the 15th century. We are following a young boy, later young man. It's hard to know what to call him because he moves through lots of different names throughout the novel, but when we first meet him, he's John, and he's 10 years old. He's living with his father on a farm. He's lived an ordinary village life. His brothers have gone off to do apprenticeships, and one day he is told that he is going to be taken to Oxford in order to study to become a scholar. And when he gets to Oxford, he is told that in fact his father was not his father. His real father is a dead nobleman, and he is going to be educated and trained up to be a pretender to the throne. So during the reign of first Richard III and later Henry VII, Henry Tudor, our main character John and all his various other aliases is being trained and put forward as a pretender to the throne, and the sort of Yorkist faction of the War of the Roses are putting him forward as a challenge to the current king. And I just thought The Pretender was absolutely fantastic. Imagine like Glorious Exploits by Ferdy and Lennon meets Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Like that's what The Pretender felt like to me. I just loved the main character so much. It's such a wonderful, sort of devastating coming of age story, because we're following John, who is nice and kind and ordinary, as all of these people try and mold him into various shapes and make him into what they want him to be. And I thought, as a coming of age story and a character study, it was just fantastic. But also all of the political drama, all of the intrigue, all the sort of complications of court and politics and betrayal was all so powerfully done. And I just absolutely loved the tone and writing style of The Pretender. It is a book that is very, very funny, very rude and irreverent and witty and playful, but also like absolutely devastating. And I think that's what put me in mind of Glorious Exploits by Ferdy and Lennon, which I so loved from the Walter Scott Prize last year. It's that combination of like really funny and like super dark, and really, really emotional. And I just had like such affection for the main character. I was so emotionally invested in him. I so wanted him to be okay. And it's one of those books that sort of like plays with the weight of history, because you're reading this book and you know, if you know anything about English history, you know this boy is not going to become king. You know that the endings for him are quite limited and possibly all quite bad. And I just thought that like really enriched the reading experience and sort of, you know, increased the tension a lot, I guess. In a really clever way. And in general, it's a book that looks at history really interestingly, partly because the main character is interested in reading and writing history, and there's lots of like interesting discussion about what history is and who gets to write history. How do you know what is and isn't true? Was King Arthur real, etc. There's lots of discussion of history within this book about real historical events, which is really, really interesting and I really liked. But I also loved the reframing of all of this like historical political drama as this really powerful personal coming of age story about like identity and understanding yourself. And I just loved it. I thought The Pretender was so good. So yeah, I just really, really loved The Pretender. It was just such fun to read while also being like really dark and emotionally engaging, and just like all of the things I like books to be. It was so good. So I highly recommend The Pretender. I would be very happy if either The Pretender or The Matchbox Girl wins the Walter Scott Prize. We will see what happens. As I said, I've got one more book from the shortlist to read, and I also want to read at least one more book from the long list. I've got the 2 Roberts out from the library, and I still want to pick up that. Whether or not I read anything else from the long list that didn't make the shortlist, I'm not sure. I will have a think. Do let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them. I'd love to hear if you also love The Pretender, because I just had such a great time with that one. I thought it was so fun. And otherwise, that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.